Hi, and welcome to Light the Way. It's great to see you both. John, one of ALLMEP's biggest projects this year was partnering with the U.S. Institute of Peace to conduct this survey on Palestinian and Israeli youth. Can you tell us more about the project and why it was so important specifically to focus on young people?
Of course. Thank you, Dina. Thank you, Sally. And thank you, everybody, for joining the Gala this evening. Many of our members are working with these youngest Israelis and Palestinians, so we thought it was important to know what their attitudes were towards each other, towards diplomacy, final status, democracy, a whole host of different issues. And we also, if we think about it, have to recognize that this is a very different generation of Israelis and Palestinians. I mean, first of all, even the oldest of the people we polled, who were around 21, they grew up after the collapse of the Oslo Accords and into the violence of the Second Intifada and the cycle of Israel-Gaza wars that came afterwards, and also into this paradigm of separation where walls, permits, and checkpoints really prevent them from being able to access each other more than maybe any other generation since 1967. And it's also worthwhile remembering that these are very young societies, much younger median ages than we have in the United States or Europe, for example. So we were delighted to work with our friends and partners at USIP and with Dr. Dalia Shendlin and Dr. Khalil Shikaki, really two of the best pollsters working in Israel and Palestine, to look narrowly at this 15 to 21-year-old cohort, to design a survey and then also to run a series of focus groups that we conducted right after the violence in May. Now, probably surprising nobody, there was some troubling findings inside this poll for all the reasons I outlined earlier, for those of us that care about peace in the region. We saw majorities that reject the historical connection of the other to the land, and also majorities that think that violence is the best or the only way to achieve their political goals. But if we zoom out, we know that the programs of our members, these people-to-people peace-building programs, are incredibly effective at halting and reversing those same sort of attitudes. We've had rigorous studies by Notre Dame University, George Washington University, and others that show that they really are a dependable tool in disrupting some of those attitudes. So now we also see that we have large majorities, if we return back to the poll by Dr. Shendlin and Dr. Shikaki, that are potential participants in these programs. We found that less than a third of both societies thought the programming was illegitimate and would not participate, which suggests that under the right conditions, we have large majorities of youth who can engage in these programs, have their attitudes potentially transformed over time, but maybe more importantly, have the chance to sit down together as equals and figure out ways in which they can share this land together as equals in the future and perhaps succeed where previous generations have failed.
Well, turning to you, Lucy, why did the U.S. Institute of Peace want to partner on this initiative? And how do you think the findings shape your thinking and strategy at the Institute around the pursuit of a genuine, just peace in the region?
Sure. Thank you, Sally, and thank you, John. And if I can just take the opportunity to congratulate the entire ALLMEP team and, of course, all of ALLMEP's membership on its incredibly hard work and dedication throughout this difficult year. We know from these poll results, as John has indicated, this work is not easy. So as you continue to light the way with your resilience and, yes, also your all too often unilluminated impact, please know there are so many of us inspired by that work that you do. Sally, you mentioned the institute I work for, the U.S. Institute of Peace. We are committed to informing policy, but also to supporting the work of peace builders on the ground, building peace from the ground up. So we see it as essential to make sure that our analysis and our partnerships are very much informed by an accurate view of what the values, concerns, fears, beliefs are of the people most impacted by this conflict. So while the results are sobering, again, as John has indicated, I don't think they argue for urgency, certainly, but not for despair. There's definitely evidence of convergence of views and attitudes here, and possibilities that suggest areas for hope. So, for example, while minorities still support two-state solution, on both sides, there's a mirror image of these societies saying that we still feel that this is the best alternative to any other outcome. We also see that 90% on both sides value the importance of living in a democratic society. And so while this value does get deprioritized when pitted against other national and identity-based values, we know that these values can coexist when both sides don't feel like they're locked in a zero-sum existential conflict. So this work together is really essential to ensuring that both peace and democracy can thrive. We also saw that majorities on both sides respect the majority religion of the other side, also pointing to some strong possibilities of religiously grounded work and interventions. And we also saw majorities on both sides saying that actually regular people could solve this conflict together, because it's really just about political leaders fighting over their own interests. So while we know that polls are just one data point, they are a valuable snapshot. And we know that public opinion is dynamic and responds to positive political and diplomatic developments and confidence building measures. So as Sally and John, you both mentioned the Lowy Act and how important it is to provide this opportunity to scale up this important work. I know that John and I and all of us share the hope that this study can help point the way maybe to the right goals and approaches to help maximize the impact and investment of the US and the international community, and of course the investment and time and energy of the Israelis and Palestinians on the ground who are really working to transform their future more peacefully. So once again, ALLMEP, congratulations.
Thanks so much for this, Lucy and John. And we also have a chance now to loop in the two public opinion experts who conducted this poll and also a series of focus groups that went with them. And that's Dr. Dalia Shidlin and Dr. Khalil Shikaki, two of the region's top polling experts. So my first question is for Dr. Shikaki. What do you think this poll now can tell us about what do you think this poll can tell us who are looking for a path toward a more peaceful and just reality?
I have four things for you that I think are highly useful for those who are indeed interested in pursuing this. Most importantly, there is indeed a great deal of respect for the religion of the other side. This is extremely important in terms of values. We do see that most of the Palestinians, for example, also view all types of dialogue as legitimate. Only a small minority, actually just less than a third, view dialogue as illegitimate. We also find about a third of the Palestinians preferring dialogue over boycott. I'm now just referring to those Palestinians, the very young Palestinians. And we also find, as I indicated earlier, that there is a great deal of liberalism than the rest of the population, including the youth. The importance of democracy, minority rights, these are indeed things that are similar to what we also found among Israeli Jews.
Thank you, Dr. Shikaki. And what's your take, Dr. Shidlin? We know there is some worrying trends in there, but can you tell us maybe about some interesting openings and opportunities that could be taken advantage of?
Yeah, I think we had some interesting openings in the survey as well, that maybe those were the parts that surprised me. For example, on both sides, we had a majority, over half of Palestinians and about 60% of Israeli young people who believe that the conflict is more driven by political leaders and that regular people could get along on their own. That was a question we asked in just that way. We sort of read that sentence and said, do you agree with this or disagree with this? And a majority on both sides agree with that. That's hopeful because people express that they are open to having a peaceful relationship with the other people. And to that end, I think that also we saw about twice as many who believe that a political agreement can be found that would resolve the conflict, as opposed to the position that no political agreement will resolve the conflict. Now, that's not to overstate the case. We're talking about roughly half, but still a clear plurality who believe that a peace agreement, a political resolution can resolve the issue. So I think that is a starting point that opens things up. Also, I would like to give the parallel data to the points that Dr. Shikaki mentioned about people's openness to dialogue with the other side. Certainly among Israeli Jews, when we asked if they prefer to have dialogue or do they subscribe to the opinion that you shouldn't talk with the other side and rather you should boycott them, most of them prefer to have dialogue. Again, close to half, as opposed to just about a third who would prefer not to talk to them. So there's more people who want dialogue than to boycott one another. I certainly think the respect for one another's religion is an opening. Too often we see religion as a source of friction in this conflict, and too often it does play that role. But the survey showed that on both sides, a strong majority had respect for the other side's religion. And I think even to my mind, one of the most important shared findings that were really parallel, on both sides, is that between 80 and 90% view democracy as important. Okay, even if it's not necessarily their top priority right now because they have very urgent priorities, but the fact that when considered on its own, such an overwhelming portion believe that democracy, with its focus on equal rights for all, in some political framework is important, I think those all combined give us quite a number of openings for moving ahead.
So thank you, Dalia and Khalil, and also to Lucy and John for breaking that down for us. That was really helpful. And this poll shows us, right, that the way reality is viewed for millions of young Israeli and Palestinians who have inherited this conflict. That civil society can help light the way to a more sustainable and peaceful future, especially if it's done at scale.